Welcome to Deep Dives with Will and Reubs.
It's a show that is making accounting cool again.
I'm Will.
And I'm Reubs.
And today we are looking at metrics that matter.
That's right. In this session, in this episode of ours, we dive beyond the P&L, beyond the balance sheet, into the nitty-gritty accounting things that we deal with day to day, the things that you should be measuring in your business, how to measure those things, and why they're important.
Yeah, so the accounting industry is heading away from the compliance world due to automation and technology doing a lot of that bookkeeping and debits and credit type work, and into the advisory type space where they're looking at analysing the numbers and providing advice around those numbers. And at the moment, I think a lot of the industry looks at just the profit and loss and the balance sheet, where Reubs and I believe that there's a bit more going on than the profit and loss and the balance sheet, whether that be what's happening in the inventory, so stock turn, or whether we're looking at professional services, or in the trades we're looking at productivity and write-offs and things like that. So we want to go a little bit deeper than just the P&L on the balance sheet. So we wanted to, I suppose, help you understand some of these other metrics that are a bit more than the P&L.
So today we're going to be looking at write-ons and write-offs. Is that right?
That's right, yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So at the end of the session, you're going to have a good understanding about what write-ons and write-offs are, who they apply to, how we calculate them, and why they're so important.
And how to reduce them.
Fantastic. Okay, before we get into that though, we have our quote of the week.
Quote of the week this week is by Tim Ferriss, and this is one of his most famous ones, which is, "What we fear the most is what we most need to do."
What we fear the most is what we most need to do.
What we fear the most is often what we most need to do.
Okay, yep. What we fear the most is often what we most need to do. He wrote the 4-hour work week.
He did, yeah.
Excellent. Well, I really vibe with that because often, I keep a to-do list like I'm sure you do, and normally the things at the bottom of that are probably the most important.
That's right.
And the things at the top are the easiest to do.
Yeah. And before we ripped into this, you were talking, Reubs, about something that you do. If you've got something that is important and it's the bottom of your to-do list, what's your little technique to do those things?
The first thing is not just to drag it to the top and then let other things sit on top of it again, which is often what ends up happening. I drag it to the top and then new things get on top of that. But I'll put it out loud. I'll say to myself, I'm putting this off because. I'll say, I'm putting this off because this is hard. I'm putting this off because I don't know what I'm doing. I'm putting this off because I don't want to do it. It might be a difficult conversation. It might be a difficult thing to calculate. It might be something I know very little about. How to prepare a podcast, for example. So vocalizing it to yourself is a really good step for me in tackling these most important but least prioritized items.
Yeah, and step 2 for you?
Another one is if that doesn't work, I'll talk to someone else about it. I'll say, Will, I don't know anything about how to create a podcast, and I've been putting it off for a long, long time, and it's been on my list for a long, long time. So talking to someone else, like a trusted, somebody you feel comfortable talking to about it, then that's the next step in helping, because then they can help you. They might be able to do it with you. They may be able to have that conversation with you, or they may be able to help you do that thing, or give you the kick that you need to make that first step.
That's right. And then you mentioned also going to a different environment.
Yeah, so sometimes it's motivation. Like sometimes I may know what to do and I may know how to do it, but I just lack the motivation or the discipline to do it. And so one way that I can make that thing at the bottom of my to-do list that's really important, tick it off, is to change my environment. So if I'm not feeling very motivated here, sitting at my desk, and I haven't done in the last 2 weeks, and I still haven't done that thing I've been meaning to do for 2 weeks, then don't beat myself up on the week number 3 when it's still not done. Change your environment. Go to a different location. If it's a different setting, go to a cafe, or do something different. Change your setting when you tackle that task. Deliberately book it out in your calendar. I'll go to my local cafe and I'll go and buy myself a breakfast, and I'll say, right, well, I'm going to do this thing when I'm at that cafe.
That's awesome, man, and that's something I've learned from you just now, because I've got something on my to-do list. It's been there for about 2 weeks. It's just some documentation I need to read.
Yep.
So you can imagine how thrilled I am about sitting down and reading like 30 pages of documentation.
Mm-hmm.
It's been on my list for about 2 weeks. My deadline is, I think, Tuesday next week. I have to have it done by. So perhaps, like Friday morning, I could just go book half an hour and a half at a cafe, get a long black.
Exactly.
And then, just get into it.
Totally, yeah. Whatever works for you you, whatever setting works for you, but you've just done step 2, which is to vocalise it to somebody else.
That's right. Yeah,
So now
exactly.
I'll be like, hey, maybe I'll join you. Maybe we'll go together and I'll do some other work next to you. But
Totally.
it's holding you accountable for that activity.
Yeah, sweet. So with that quote as well, I had something that I wanted to talk about as well is how what you fear the most is often the thing that you most need to do. Now, for me, in business, it hasn't been a really nice journey to get to where we are today. I've had, which we'll talk about in the fuck-ups and failures, all the problems that I've had. And there's been multiple occasions that I've ran out of cash when I'm pursuing an objective, and I've had to let go of my team, which is it's awful. It's really not nice. It's really not nice. And that's something that I feared doing because it affects other people and it affects people that I care about. And some of these times, these people are my friends. And having to let go of your team, that you fear that so much, but what you need to do is you need to do that because otherwise the ship's going to go down, everyone's coming with you. So at least if you can go and have those difficult conversations saying, hey, look, I can't afford to keep you anymore. This is what I'm going to do to help you find a new role and I'm going to pay you out X amount to get you out. Then what I can do is I managed to get the business, get them into a new role, get my business back on track before it got really bad. But those conversations are awful. They're really awful, and I think that's that's why that quote's really cool. It's because, man, I feared those conversations. You feel sick to your stomach even asking to have that conversation, but what did I need to do more than anything? I needed to do that, because by doing that, and again this comes back to opportunities often comes disguised in the form of misfortune or temporary defeat. Through moving that team onwards, we looked at how can we scale our business without resource, and that's what brought up Link Academy. That's where we learned to film ourselves. That's where all these opportunities and all our new business model came from. So yeah, it was doing what I feared the most, which really brought us to that next level. And everyone's moved on to do great things since then. But yeah, I think that was a really cool quote, because it's if you really, really don't want to do something, the chances are you need to do it.
That's the most important. Yeah, totally.
All right. Well, sweet.
That's our quote of the week. Let's get into metrics that matter. And this week we're looking at write-ons and write-offs. What are write-ons and write-offs?
Cool. So I quite like explaining this. So the best way to think about a write-on and a write-off is it's the difference between what you have invoiced for the work you've done and the billable amount of time that you have, or billable amount of fees that you have done. So let's look at an example. Let's say, for example, I have a billable rate of $200 per hour. Now, if I do 10 hours of work, how much billable time do I have?
$2,000.
I've got $2,000 of billable time, because it's 200 multiplied by the 10 hours. Now, if I send an invoice for that work of $1,500, I've invoiced less than the billable time. And I may do that for a number of reasons. One is because I agreed that I was going to bill them $1,500, and that was it. The other one is I might finish the work and go, I can't really get away with billing $2,000 for this work that I've done. I'll bill them $1,500. And there could be a number of other reasons, but the point is we've invoiced less than the billable time that we've done. So we've logged the full 10 hours. So the difference between what I've invoiced, which was $1,500, and the billable time, which is $2,000, is $500. So that's a write-off. So what I've done is I've written off $500. Now, if we look at the alternative scenario, where if I was to do $2,000 of billable time, but I send an invoice for, let's say, $3,000, well, now I've got a $1,000 write-up. So what we want to be doing is reducing the write-offs in our organisation, and ideally having write-ups. Now, how do we have write-ups? We have write-ups by fixed pricing the work and doing the work faster than we anticipated. Or we can have write-ups by doing the work and going, hey, we've actually done this really quickly. Maybe we can bundle a couple of extra hours on here and send the invoice. So that's how we can have write-ups. So what we want to be doing in our organisation is reducing our write-offs and increasing our write-ups. So I think that quite clearly explains what a write-up and a write-off is.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And what is a net write-up or write-off? What is a net write-off?
Yeah, cool. So a net write-up or write-off. So on a job basis, we're going to have a write-up or a write-off on that job. So once the job's completed, we can recognise the write-up or the write-off. Now, a net write-up or write-off is looking at across, let's say, in a period. So let's say for the organisation in the month of October, what was our net write-up? And that is going to be looking at all the jobs that were closed out in that period, that is going to be the figure. So it might be, let's say, our write-off might have been $7,000 for that period. So our net write-up would be negative 7,000, because we generally talk about write-ups.
Yep.
Because when we're looking at a report, if we see it as a positive number, that's going to be a write-up. If we see it as a negative number, it's going to be a write-off. So that's why you generally look at a report that would have write-up or write-up percentage. So your net write-ups rather than write-offs.
Right. Yeah.
Cool. So we can look at our net write-ups on an organisation level. So we're looking at all the jobs that were closed out within a period, but we can also look at net write-ups at a staff member level or at a client level.
Right.
So there's different ways we can look at this information. So if we're looking at a staff member level, we can go, right, well, Ruben did this many hours, this is the amount of billable time, and then of the jobs that were closed in this period, he had write-offs of 2,000, and he had write-ups of 3,000.
Great. Sounds like a pretty good guy.
That's right, he's a good guy. We'll keep him on.
Yeah.
So his net write-up was $1,000 because he had 3,000 write-up, 2,000 write-off, so the net write-up was $1,000.
Yes.
So that's what the net write-ups are. Now I know what your next question is what is our net write-up percentage?
Yes. That's the part that trips most people up.
This is the metric we're talking about, because it's really hard when we're looking at these net write-up or figures. It's quite hard to know what is this in relation to,
Totally.
So if I was to say to you, hey, Ruben did a net write-up of $1,000, well, is that good or bad?
No idea.
We've got no idea. Which period are we talking about? Which job are we talking? We don't know. But if we can look at it from a write-up percentage, we're looking at a metric now. And what's cool about a metric is it's a percentage. So the write-up is in relation to the billable time that we've done. So I suppose this is, it depends on what report we're looking at now, isn't it?
It does a little bit, but continue down the route of the staff performance. So if I want to see what Ruben's write-up percentage was, how would I go about calculating that?
So if we're looking at Ruben's write-up percentage in a period, we're going to take the write-ups, less the write-offs, which is our net write-up. And then we're going to divide that figure by the total billable time he's done in that period.
Okay, so fire me some numbers now.
All right, so...
The percentages don't have to be exact, but you do.
Okay, I'll do my best. Okay, so let's say Ruben did $20,000 of billable time for the month.
Great.
And then his net write-up was $1,000. So then what we could do is we could take the $1,000 and we divide it by the 20,000, which is going to give us 5%.
Positive 5%.
Correct.
Write-up. So that means for every dollar of billable time Ruben did in that month, we actually managed to invoice $1.05.
That's correct. Yeah. So we know that for this month anyway, Ruben's his net write-up percentage is 5%. So exactly as you said, for every hour that Ruben works, we can bill $1 so every dollar that Ruben puts on his timesheet, we can bill $1.05, which is awesome. So that's how we calculate it in a staff world. So if we're looking at our staff, we're looking at the net write-ups divided by the billable time done for that staff member. Now, the net write-ups we look at slightly differently when we're looking at an organisation level.
Yes.
What we've got is we're looking at the time and the cost entered in the period. So disbursements, correct. Like so that's good to clarify. So time and disbursements entered in the period. So we're going to add those two together to give us a total amount of billable value.
Billable value.
That's right. And then what we do is we take the net write-offs and divide it by that figure there. So that's the difference between looking at it from an organisation level and looking at it at a staff level. At a staff level, we don't include disbursements at that write-up percentage, but when we're looking at an organisation level, it's going to, and that's when we might see some slight differences between the two metrics there. But generally, it's such an important metric to be looking at, and in terms of the what our targets are.
That was my next question for my practice. What would be a good write-up percentage?
0.
So I bill everything that I do.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, in a perfect world, you've got write-ups. So you go, right, well, my write-up percentage was 5%. Well, that's awesome. That's awesome.
So quite rare.
Yeah. You need to be fixed pricing your work, and which is a good idea. But I think, especially when you're working in a predominantly time billable world, like a timesheet world, it's really hard to push into write-ups. But what we want to do is, ideally, we want to be getting, if we're billing time, if we're creating value for our client and our billable rates are set accurately or fair for what the market is willing to pay, that's when we'd expect to see 0% as our write-up percentage. So if we have a large amount of write-ups, what that could indicate is that our billable rates are too low.
True. Yeah.
Because let's say, for example, so
you're invoicing way higher than the value that you're measuring. So you need to be raising your hourly rates if you are charging hourly for anything still.
Correct. That's
you need to be putting it up because you can do a lot more work not charging hourly.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So what that says to me, if you've got a huge amount of write-ups, so let's say 90% of your work is fixed fee and you're getting all these write-ups on it. Well, think about this other 10%. Well, we're actually probably not charging enough for that work because our billable rates are not reflecting the value that people are paying for the work we're doing
elsewhere. Yeah, exactly, man.
Yeah,
totally.
So I think 0% is ideally the target that we want, because if you're pushing well into some high write-up percentages, well, that would indicate to me that we need to lift our billable rates.
Totally.
Now, if we're having large write-offs,
most people aren't don't have write-ups, right? Most people are not invoicing the full value or the billable time they're doing. Is that fair to say?
That's correct. Yeah. So write-ups are very rare. I mean, they are they're common in on a job by job basis, but on a net throughout the whole organisation, to see a global write-up for a whole organisation, not very common. What we often see is anything under 10%. We generally say is acceptable.
Anything right off.
Yeah, so if you were to look at an organisation over 12 months, let's just make it a $2 million turnover business.
Yeah.
When you're getting into that size turnover, we generally see anything under 10% is good. When you're getting into 12, 15, 20%, then we're starting to go, hey, this is not good.
So a 20% write-off from my practice, does that mean that I'm only invoicing 80 cents for every dollar of billable value I'm doing?
It does. That's exactly right. Okay. Yeah. So this is why it's such an important metric to track. Is sometimes we see write-off percentages sitting around 30, even 35%, and that's just either you've fixed priced your work far too low.
Yeah, too cheap.
Which is the most common scenario when that happens. When you see write-off percentages getting that low, so when you see your write-off percentage being that low, it's because you've fixed your price your work low, or your average or your billable rates are way too high, and you need to pull these down to what the market will accept.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. What about on a staff member level though? So it's on the practice 10% write-off percentages, somewhere between 0 and 10% would be normal or good, I guess. What about on an individual? What would I expect to see in my staff?
So I think write-offs aren't necessarily a bad thing if they're under control. So for example, if you're seeing maybe 2 or 3% write-offs on a staff member level, you can't look at it and go, oh, we need to get that to 0. That's not
the goal.
That's not necessarily the goal. What that says to me is that we've got this person's hourly rate pushed as high as we can for what the market will accept. So if we've got 0 write-offs, that means that we could probably be charging a little bit more for this person's time because no one's ever queried a bill of theirs.
Yeah, totally. We haven't had to write off any of their time.
Yeah. So you do want to, I'm say 0% as a target write-off. That's in a perfect world. If you're not ever having any write-offs, you might look at your billable rates and think, well, these probably need to go up a little bit, and then you're starting a little bit pushback from customers. You go, okay, now I'm starting to be charging what the market will accept.
Right. Yeah. So it's a bit of a balancing act. What are the main causes of? Let's imagine I've got a staff member with my practice might have a write-off percentage of 10%, so my practice is looking good. But I've got a couple of staff members that are sitting at the 20%, where we're not able to invoice a lot of their time. What are some? What can I do with that information? What are some things question. I can look into from there?
Perfect question. So what you've essentially said is my practice write-off percentage is at 10% or maybe a little bit less. So I'm looking pretty good. It might be 8%, and then but then I've got a few staff members that are sitting around 20% write-offs, over month in month out, writing off 20%.
Yeah.
So what that says to me is that this staff member is potentially one of two things, I suppose, as their billable rate is too high, and you could have that rate set too high, and they or they're taking too long on their jobs.
Yeah, so it's they're not as effective with it. Well, they're not meeting the estimated times or the expectation around how long things should take.
That's right, and I suppose to go down a little bit of a rabbit hole here is I think that your billable rate should be around about 4 times your salary. So if you're paying someone $30 an hour, you'd expect to see their billable rate sitting at about $120 an hour.
Yep.
So if you are writing off 20% of your time at a $120 billable rate, they're not really doing anything to earn themselves a pay rise.
Right.
Whereas if they are sitting at a 5% write-off or even a 0% write-off or even getting write-ups, you go, well, this person we're currently charging out $120 an hour and they're not getting any write-offs. Well, let's look at putting them up to $150 an hour, and maybe give them a bit of a pay rise.
Exactly.
And then what's happened is the staff member is happy because they've got a pay rise and they feel like they're being rewarded for the work they're doing, and they feel like they're part of the team, and they're being recognised, and they feel they're getting that fulfilment from their job. And what's also happening is, because you may have lifted their wage by $5 an hour, but you've lifted their billable rate by $30 an hour. So that extra $25 an hour is now going into the company pocket. And as long as those write-offs are not occurring, you can probably go, hey, well, let's lift this person to a $170 billable rate and lift them up again. Yeah. And you sort of want to keep that billable rate in line with 4 times salary. That's sort of the rule of thumb. So, and then if the write-offs aren't occurring, that means that we can look at keep on moving that up until they get to a point where, right, okay, now the work they're doing is what the market is paying for. And then this sort of feeds slightly into our productivity as well. So what we want to be seeing is you've got, I suppose I'm jumping into average hourly rates here, but we can chat about that one in another episode. But we want to see our average hourly rates to be 3 times salary cost. And that's because we've got, let's say, for example, our target productivity being 75% across the whole organisation. Yep. And if their salary is, let's say, $50, I'm just going to take easy numbers here. Okay. $50 salary. Yep. Billable rate would be $200. Yes. Then you'd expect to see an average hourly rate of $150 an hour at a 75% productivity, assuming no write-offs. So those are the sort of metrics that you'd be expecting to see in a professional services environment.
So in terms of a staff member, if they've got a high write-off percentage, we talked about maybe the billable rates are too high, so we're having a write-off, we're not able to invoice the total value, or maybe they're not meeting their targets. What are some things I can do to make that better? Like obviously fixing that billable rate's easy to do. I guess. But what about the time factor? What do I do about making them more effective?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that comes down to the management of the team. These are the one of the problems you have to solve in business, right? Is when you are running an accounting practice or an engineering firm or an architecture practice or whatever it is, you're in the business of employing people to run projects and bill their time effectively, so you can pay them a percentage of what you're billing their time. That percentage should ideally be about a third of their average hourly rate, as we've discussed. Now, if we're wanting to, we ideally want to pay this person as much as possible.
So we retain the best talent.
Correct. Yep. But in order to do that, they've got their part, which they need to be effective of the time, effective on the jobs that they're working on, and that's going to come with repetition. So there's a couple of things that happen here. Is sometimes staff just aren't fast. You just have staff that are super fast at getting their work done, and some staff that aren't super quick at getting their work done. And that's where we need to look at playing people to their talents. So you might have someone who's a little bit slower at maybe doing jobs.
Local, maybe less rework perhaps.
Exactly, yeah. So those are sort of things, and then we go, well, actually, maybe this person would be really good in maybe a management type role, looking after a bit more of a team. Yeah. But you might have people that are really good at just smashing work out, and we go, cool, well, let's keep them smashing work out. We'll pay them really well for it. Yeah. So it's about understanding in the organisation that you have different people with different talents, and that's where it comes back to setting these goalposts, setting these KPIs, and setting these targets for people, so they know when they turn up to work what do they need to do and how are they being judged. Isn't the right word, but how? What are the expectations? Exactly. Yeah. So another big thing I think that doesn't really get talked about when it comes to write-ons and write-offs is people just jibber jabbering all day.
Okay. Yeah.
It's funny when you look around an office, there's always a couple of people that like to chat, and you're going to think every time they have a bit of a conversation, they're breaking concentration from the work they're doing. So what happens is if we keep chatting about what we're doing, and this is happening in the phone call, and we keep talking, we're breaking concentration, so the task that we're working on will take longer. So let's say if you were to just focus 100% on finishing something, that might take you 8 hours. But if you're turning up to work and your main intention to turn up to work is to socialise and eat your lunch and get some work done, well, that might be a 15-hour job now. So what happens if we might have priced this job at 10 hours, we could have done it in 8 and got a write-up, but because we're chatting all day, doing other bits and pieces, we took 15 hours, so we have a 5-hour write-off, and that's going to be reflected in our write-offs and therefore our average hourly rates. We're not earning ourselves a pay rise. So if we want to get a pay rise, we want to make sure that when we're turning up to work, we're bloody working, we're getting the jobs done. And then what that's going to do, it's going to show in our reports. It's going to show that we're productive. It's going to show that we're not getting write-offs. It shows that we're doing our work on time. It shows we're justifying our hourly rate. Then we can look at lifting that hourly rate, therefore lifting the salary, and that's how we can grow on the organisation. But if we're turning up to eat our lunch and have a chat, that's where you won't see progression in your career.
Totally. It takes 2 to have a conversation, right?
It does.
At least 2 people.
Yeah, so it's I think it's important as a director, if you've got a large team, is to be aware, looking at the numbers and looking at the productivity and the run-ons and write-offs, but also doing a reconciliation of what you're seeing and what you're hearing and seeing out there in the office. Because if there's someone talking all the time, you'll probably see that this will be a pattern on their staff reports.
Often, I know when I'm dealing with people, I'm not telling them anything new about their practice or about their business. I'm just reinforcing the things they already know. I'm just showing them the numbers in behind what they already suspect or feel.
That's right.
Yeah. So maybe remote work for those jibber jabberers.
That's right. We just need to. It's a problem that you need to solve, and that's something that we can't solve for you right here. But at least what we want to do is create the awareness. If we can create the awareness that this is what's happening, reconcile what you're seeing and hearing against what the reports say, and then you could look at putting things in place to solve that. Maybe you just know that Sally and Jane talk a lot. We'll put Sally next to Daniel and Jane next to Vanessa, who just want to get their work done, and then they can catch up at the water cooler at lunchtime and chat.
Perfect.
So it may be changing people's where they're sitting. It's just simple things like that. This is your problem to solve as a director. How do we increase our productivity? Which is by analysing the non-productive time and bringing administrators in to do the non-productive stuff to keep our billable staff billable. And the write-offs, how do we look at increasing, how do we shorten the time to finish the work that people are being allocated, and that's
make it more efficient.
Exactly, yeah. So those are just 2 really important metrics. If you want to increase the performance in your business, lift productivity, reduce your write-offs, and then you'll just be amazed at how quickly things start falling into place.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I think that's it for write-ons and write-offs. Is there anything else you want to touch on there?
No, I think that pretty much covers it off. Yeah,
definitely a metric that matters, especially to people who sell time for money, which is a lot of different people.
It's so important, and if once you start seeing this information and seeing this data, it's just incredible. It's like turning on a light bulb in a dark room and seeing what's happening.
Absolutely. If there's one thing you can take away from this conversation, it's that you need to be measuring these things if you are in this sort of industry.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Fantastic. Right, should we wrap it up there, and we'll come back to you next week with another episode, another installment of Will's Fuck Ups and Failures.
Let's do it. Looking forward to it.